Now we're going to switch gears a little bit and start to look at what happens when things do go wrong. And again, we have a panel of experts to help lead us through the session on how resilient organisations respond to risk. So how do we set up our organisations to be resilient to risk, and how do we respond when a risk event occurs? Being robust and able to recover quickly from risk events is crucial. And how any business does recover when something happens is the mark of how it will continue and how successful that business will be. So we here have three speakers with three very diverse ranges of experience and points of view, which I'm sure will make for an interesting discussion following the speeches. As with the last session, we'll have the presentations first and then we'll ask questions together at the end. And I will introduce all three speakers at once so we can just roll straight through. Firstly, we have Saskia Goedhart, who is the Chief Risk Officer at AMP. Saskia joined AMP as Chief Risk Officer in July 2015. Prior to that, she relocated to Australia for that role, and prior to that was a partner at Ernst & Young based in Toronto, leading the risk management in financial services practice in Canada and the risk management in insurance practice in the US. Saskia has also been the Chief Risk Officer for the North American region of Aviva and Munich Re. Prior to Munich Re, Saskia worked in risk management roles, senior risk management roles in the US and Japan and throughout the financial services sector. She's passionate about designing and implementing risk management frameworks that are fit for purpose and that focus on adding value to the business. As a leader, she cares deeply about building and developing high-performing teams and providing development opportunities for staff in this important area. Our second speaker is Eric Pinkerton. Eric has been breaking things just to fix them again since before he could walk. Let's hope he doesn't break us this afternoon. At 20, he spent his summer evenings as a nightclub bouncer and read tarot cards during the day. He didn't realise it back then, but nothing could have prepared him better for a career in infosecurity, trying to predict the future whilst ducking the punches. Eric cut his teeth as a technologist for the BBC World Service in London, where he learned the importance of educate, inform and entertain. He also developed his passion for emerging technologies with a bent for security. Arriving in Australia in 2003, he landed an operational role at Australia's first IP telco and has since served hard time at Telstra, Stratsec, BAE Systems, Datacom, CSC and Hivent. Eric has presented at CBIT, AusCert, ASA and OSNOG, if anybody knows what they are. I'm sure that was very interesting sessions. Believes in a healthy level of cynicism and blogs about privacy, security and the myth of infallibility in humans. And our third speaker is Tony Harb. Tony is a highly adaptable and engaging enterprise risk management professional, passionate about helping create more resilient organisations. He consults to financial services, ASX-listed companies and the public sector in the areas of enterprise risk management, audit and assurance, fraud and corruption and business continuity management. Prior to establishing InConsult in 2001, Tony held senior roles with Ernst & Young, Allianz and Combrook. He has worked with Standards Australia and UTS to deliver ISO 31000 briefings in Sydney and Melbourne, along with the ISO 31000 chairperson Kevin Knight. Tony is also a presenter of 1 Minute Risk Manager, InConsult's YouTube channel. Tony is a Deputy Local Controller and Emergency Officer with the New South Wales State Emergency Service in his spare time, responsible for planning, operational preparedness, training, community engagement and exercising. Tony brings his frontline emergency management skills and experience to InConsult's business continuity and crisis management services. So as you can see, we have a wealth of experience in all sorts of areas of risk, and we look forward to hearing from Saskia, Eric and Tony. And I'll hand over to Saskia to get us going.
Yes, thank you, Pauline, and thank you, people here in the room. If you've been here the entire day, I admire your perseverance in risk. That is a highly necessary trait. So we're off to a good start. Resiliency, organizations, and risk. Now, if I look at resilience, I think of how do we overcome unexpected events with a negative potential impact. That is very much related to risk, which I would say is an unexpected loss from an expected outcome. So how do organizations get resilient? How should they be structured? What kind of capabilities should they have to manage risk? That is the question, and the other question is, how does this work? We have a clicker here. Okay. Now, appropriately responding to risk absolutely increases your resilience. To give you an example, when I was in the US during the global financial crisis, my team had actually, and I was in charge of balance sheet management in those days, which was great in 2008, because in a span of about a week, 20% of your balance sheet in economic terms sort of disappeared up in thin air. My team had actually looked at ways that we could shore up both our statutory and our economic capital position should events happen that actually did happen during those days. We had a pretty good risk management infrastructure in place. We were able to actually, on a day-to-day, but almost real-time basis, look at what our balance sheet would look like and our P&L would look like in economic and IFRS terms if markets were to move by 40%, if interest rate spreads would move by 1,000 basis points. We had those capabilities. We had the reporting regimes. What we did not do well enough in those days was actually convince management to listen to us. So we had the capabilities, but we were not fully prepared at the right time. And that's one of the greatest lessons I took away from the global financial crisis. As a risk manager, you have to find a way to communicate to your senior management of the necessity to take precautions when you start approaching your risk limits. Having that capability, however, and having that plan in place where we could effect 11 transactions to shore up our economic and IFRS balance sheet, shaved months of our response time. So by the end of the year, we were actually pretty good in terms of stopping the leakage of our balance sheet and saving the company an awful lot of money. Had we not had those plans prepared, and had we started, or we had to have started thinking about what we could have done, we would have been hopelessly late. So my belief in having a strong risk infrastructure in place, having the right people, having the right process and the right capabilities is incredibly strong and short by actual experience. There's more experience in the market that it pays off to have strong risk management. The companies mentioned on this page are not my preferences. They're actually stated by Risk Magazine as having strong qualities in these areas. Goldman Sachs is known for its strong risk management, and they survived the global financial crisis relatively well. Their risk management teams are embedded in the organization, and risk is thoroughly embedded in decision making there. I know quite a lot of people who work in different areas of risk management, in Goldman Sachs and also in risk management, and they do confirm to me that in practice, they actually do what they preach. Berkshire Hathaway, one of the very successful investment management companies, they have a very well-defined risk management system and risk appetite, and they actually adhere to it. They stick to their algorithms, they stick to their decision frameworks, and it pays off, that consistency. Sometimes it doesn't go as we all would like it to go, and Wells Fargo, of course, was an example relatively recently about how missing a risk-aware culture and how missing the right monitoring framework fairly deep in the organization can lead to a wrong design of an incentive system and a wrong activities that incented in the people that worked in the business. And that can result in huge fines and huge business losses in terms of reputation and personal consequences in terms of top managers who need to leave the organization. So with these examples, it illustrates that what I'm talking about, having the capabilities and capacity to manage risk well, and that it improves resilience, it shows that it's not just talk, it is actually there in the market. Now, what does that risk management system look like? It's an entire framework, and the framework needs to cover how you govern risk. So does your board have risk committees that get the right information and that meet with the right frequency and talk to the right people to be informed about the design of the enterprise risk management framework, but also about its implementation and the risk culture? Is there a clear mandate for senior management on how to take risk, where to take risk, and where the boundaries of that risk-taking are? Is there an enterprise risk management function that has the sufficient capability and capacity to build the framework, run the framework, and make sure that it is equipped to report on all the risk positions and exposures that the company is exposed to? Is there a risk strategy that is a lively document and that communicates with the business strategy? Because one without the other doesn't really work. Is there a risk appetite statement? And is it operationalized? Can you measure risk? To me, that is incredibly important, because if you can't measure it, you truly cannot manage it. And measurement doesn't need to always be a number, but it does need to be a ranking of where there's more risk and where there's lesser risk, so that you can actually have a discussion and make the right decision as business management to tackle the right areas of exposure. So you have the governance set up, you've got the strategy and appetite, then you've got all the capabilities that you need to have to identify, measure, monitor, and optimize risk. Which means that for everything that you can quantify, you have to look at the impact on capital, the impact on liquidity, the impact on earnings, and the impact on reputation. If you manage those 4 aspects, you will see that your balance sheet is pretty well protected and your P&L is taken into account. For the more operational and more reputational risk, which is harder to quantify, you need to have a set of systems and procedures in place that allow you to still get a very good insight in those types of risks. You need to be able to do scenario analysis around operational risks. You need to be able to have risk and control self-assessments run for all your end-to-end processes. You need key risk indicators. You need incident logging, incident management, all those kind of basic capabilities that you also should actually have available in terms of their outcomes in consistent data that you can compare throughout the organization so that you can aggregate your risk profile. You need to be able to capture that data so that you can do trend analysis. So a trend in these kinds of things is often much more interesting than your point-in-time position. You need to be able to monitor and report at different levels in the organization. You need to be able to aggregate and disaggregate. So aggregate across, in case of AMP, the asset management business, the insurance business, the advice business, very different business types. But you still have to get to that one overarching risk number at the end of the day. So you need to have the capabilities and the system in place to do that. And you need to be able to drill down. Because if you tell the board that their capital at risk is 100, they will want to know whether that originates in the life insurance business or whether it originates in the advice business, and whether it is driven by reputational risk or whether it is driven by mortality. So the capabilities need to be quite extensive, and it's a lot of hard work to actually build that. That needs to be supported by systems and data. The right culture, really important. If people are not from the top down told that risk management is important, made aware of what risk is and that it applies to them on a day-to-day basis, they have no idea what to do in the risk awareness space. So getting the structure in place and having the tone from the top very consistently driven down in the organization, and by example and by rewarding good behaviors and not rewarding bad behaviors, that's a very important driver of culture. You need to speak the same language around risks, so the risk taxonomy needs to be consistent as well. And you need to be able to apply this entire framework across market, credit, liquidity, insurance, operational, strategic, whatever risk you see, it needs to be able to be captured in this framework. Now that framework needs to be, if you're talking about the strategic dimension of the business, where we're talking about a longer time frame, that framework needs to be in action and needs to be developed to also contribute to the strategic planning process. And usually the strategic planning process is an iterative process where senior management and the board have some assumptions and some aspirations that they want to work towards. That is translated into a business plan at the end of the day. Assumptions go into that. Threats to achieving the strategy are discussed. Scenarios and stress testing needs to take place. They need to be weighed out. The outcomes need to be weighed against the risk appetite that the board has formulated. And that process iterates around for 3-4 times until at the end of the day you have a document that signifies what you intend to do in the next 2 to 5 years. From a resilience perspective, it is very important that the enterprise risk management function is truly embedded in that process, so that at each step, they can try to help the organization identify risks that are out over the horizon. Especially in the strategic planning process, the emerging risks are going to be very important, given that we're not talking about the next year, but we're talking about things that we can't clearly see just yet. The enterprise risk management function needs to come up with all the ideas of why things can break and go wrong, and what kind of stress scenarios would be very useful to test in these scenarios, so that we are, at the end of that process, relatively certain that we will meet our business aspirations at a level of risk that we're comfortable with. And if our analysis shows that we are taking too much risk in a certain area or too much concentration of risk in a certain area across our businesses, then we need to go back and tweak some of either the aspirations or the inputs to see if we can make the total picture more optimal. So that's a very iterative process. And I mentioned that emerging risk is an important factor because of the timeline of the strategic planning and the fact that some of these emerging risks can be incredibly important to the organization in terms of impact. So it's important to have, according to your framework, a process in place that identifies your emerging risks, a process that assesses them, and then something that sort of rank orders them and does a deep dive into the 2 or 3 that we consider very important and need to know more about from a board and a business perspective. So in terms of the identification, what we try to do is come up with actually a couple of sectors, such as what is the competition doing, what is the political and regulation space doing, what is happening in technology, what is happening in the environmental space, what is happening in society, demographics, or in even the natural disaster space. We try to come up with these categories because they sort of drive the thinking and give you a little bit more structure as to what kind of events you are going to start looking for so that you can take them into account in your analysis. Then you go back to your sources of news, media, vendors, partners, external consultants, industry publications, talks with the subject matter experts in your organization to come up with what can go wrong or what can happen in the technology space that would impact my business. And that may lead to a quite long list of all kinds of impacts. And in one company that I used to work for, we had this worked out in a level of detail that all the drivers of different risks, for instance technology risk, that were relevant to the balance sheet and the income statement of the company were logged. Their second order impacts were also logged. Correlations between those risks were taken into account. So for instance, in case of a pandemic, you usually also have an asset impact because if a quarter of your population sort of falls ill, people start not buying stocks and they sort of lose confidence in whatever is happening in the world. So that would be a very bad event in the asset market as well. The combined impact, therefore, of the pandemic and the asset event would probably lead to reinsurer difficulties from a credit perspective. So taking those impacts into account, the second and order impacts of one of the risk drivers actually drove business decision making in the sense of what do we need to put in our contracts to make them safer, or which sectors do we need to divest or invest in to maintain our risk appetite profile. That was a very well developed thought process, but it took a couple of years to get that together. Having that capability is lovely because you can literally tweak some of your inputs and see the flow through to your balance sheet and your income statement. And that is so powerful in having discussions with your board about where to take risk and where not to take risk. In our environment at the moment, we're not that far yet, but we do have a list of what are the emerging risks that we want to take into account specifically, and what do we want to actually do a deep dive in. The deep dive feeds the scenarios that we use for stress testing of the strategic planning, but they can also lead to thoughts about product features, markets that we don't want to be in or do want to be in, M&A ideas, or other expansion activities that, that will allow us to optimize our return over risk, because that is ultimately the game that we're in. And what I mentioned in the beginning is any of those risks that you identify should be analyzed in terms of their impact on solvency, earnings, liquidity, and reputation. As in my belief and experience, if you take good care of those four things, you actually cover off, I would say, 99% of the risks that your company can be exposed to. So, fit for purpose risk management that improves the resilience of their business is a day-to-day thing, and it's a strategic thing. We just spoke about the strategic thing. In the day-to-day processes, you can set up your systems such that you have expectations before certain events happen, which means that you can, for instance, set limits and make sure that you don't exceed your risk appetite by formulating those limits in the correct way. Your day-to-day monitoring of where you are and setting appetites for day-to-day activities such as asset liability management is something that needs to be fed from the risk management framework. And then as the strategy is executed and your business results roll in, risk has a very strong purpose in terms of reporting whether the risks that we expected to take actually materialized and whether the returns that we wanted to get on that risk actually materialized. So the ex post reporting and the performance management and the attribution of where did we make money versus risk are important aspects that the risk framework needs to attribute to the resilience of the company as well. So that sort of rounds out why a risk framework is important to resilience and how it can work in practice. Then I hand over to Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Saskia. So apologies first up. I woke up this morning with a bit of a hay fever-induced sinus thing, so I'm going to struggle with my voice a little bit. But I'm resilient, and I've got pseudoephedrine, so you might well see a 15-minute talk delivered in 3 minutes. So apologies for that. So how resilient organizations respond to risk. You've heard a little bit about my background already. I work for a security consultant called Hyvint. It was founded in 2015. Currently 35 current staff. We've got 2 open roles, so if you really enjoy what I'm talking about, come and talk to me. I might have a job for you. We run the world's first, what we believe is the world's first security collaboration portal. We think we're Australia's fastest growing cybersecurity company, and we are 100% owned by founders and staff. So I won't bore you too much with Hyvint. So how resilient organizations respond to risk? Now, looking at this through a cybersecurity lens, I started thinking, who are resilient organizations? And obviously the first things you think of when you think resilient organizations in terms of cybersecurity are things like defense or federal government departments or some of the big 4 financial institutions. Actually, for me, those organizations that I hold up as kind of the gold standard for resilience in cyber are actually the sort of Facebooks and Microsofts and Googles of this world. And the reason that is because they've been around long enough that they've actually got some battle scars. They've got a huge attack surface, so they've actually seen everything. They've got a lot of skin in the game, and that if their cybersecurity isn't seen in the public to be good, then that really starts to affect their market share. They've got massive teams of really smart people. They've got maturity through those battle scars. And they're doing all this innovative, cool stuff. They're running bug bounties. They've got their own custom tooling. And what's interesting, if you start to look at that, is, you know, how does that help me? So in order to answer this question, really, there's no point me telling you all the fantastic things that Facebook and Google are doing, because it's not really going to help normal, you know, small enterprises unless you are playing in that space, at which point my advice to you would be go and try and headhunt some of their people. So what I thought is what we can learn for those types of organizations and what I can derive from my type of experience that actually helps the rest of us other than these kind of gold standard people. So I'm trying to catch up with the slides. So the very first thing, obviously, have a plan. Having a plan, and like Saskia mentioned, your risk methodology is absolutely critical. You're not so much responding as this is the stuff you do before something bad happens, and that is absolutely critical. However, unless you test your plan, it's just shelfware. So testing your plan, if you're the type of organization that's seeing real incidents all the time, then testing is less of an issue because you're actually going through the motions and using that in the real world. And you will learn far more from a real incident than you will from a test incident, a tabletop incident. But if you are, in terms of cybersecurity, anywhere near gaining perfection, then you won't see real incidents, then you will never test those plans, and inevitably something will happen and you'll have issues. The final piece there, am I going backwards? See, test, is to refine that plan. So every time you have an incident, you have a lessons learned, you get people in a room and you work out what went well, what went wrong, what you can tweak, what you can change. And those three things are absolutely underpinning everything that you can do, or the best things you can do. The other things that you can do, for me, be a healthy cynic. So I describe myself as a huge cynic. My wife sees the glass half full. I see an object I could use in a bar fight. You know, seriously, you can throw your drink at someone. It's probably, you know, the milk's probably sour. Get in their eyes. Then you can hit them with the glass. I think that my cynicism is actually what makes me good at what I do, because I'm always thinking, what if everyone's out to get me? What if that's bad? What if that link's, you know, evil? What if that's a virus? Now, obviously, it's not healthy to be cynical about everything, but in terms of cyber, that we call it adversarial thinking is a nice way of putting it. Essentially, it's just being victim elderly, being cynical, assuming everyone's out to get you. The next thing is surround yourself with smart people. Obviously, it's worked well for the likes of Google. Not just getting very smart people on your payroll, but getting smart people, contacts. You know, events like this are brilliant networking events to go and meet people. And that goes hand in hand with collaboration. So at Hyvient, we're very, very keen on this idea of collaboration, working with other people. You know, in cybersecurity, a lot of people get hung up on this idea of collaboration being a technical thing where we share indicators of compromise. But actually, if you go up the stack, what's important is having coffees and beers with your colleagues, networking, and paying it forward. So I'm a big believer in that companies shouldn't be competing with each other on security. So even though you're competing with other organizations in the same business, in terms of cyber, you're competing with your adversaries, which are the hackers, and they are incredibly good at collaborating. They've been sharing ideas and sharing tools and techniques for years to brilliant effect. And I would say that you know, to number two, to that testing, if you literally have a team of incident responders sitting on the bench and your competitor gets hacked and has a bad incident, then giving them a call and saying, how can we help? We've got a couple of guys sitting on the bench. We'll come and help you. That will, what goes around comes around. But more importantly, what you're doing is you're giving those people who are sitting on the bench some real-world experience, some time to learn. So it sounds counterintuitive in a world of capitalism, but actually there's an awful lot to be gained from just, you know, rather than competing on security, actually helping each other out. And I think that's the best way we have to kind of match or level the playing field rather than adversaries. I'm going to go and grab a quick water because my voice is there. Talk amongst yourselves. Collaborate. Stop collaborate. Okay. Apologies for that. Where were we? So my next point is going back to the cynicism. This is a really good example of how my mind works and my cynicism. So this picture appeared on LinkedIn and it did the rounds. Has anyone got any idea what's in the box? Anyone want to hazard a guess? So probably a TV. So what happened was the Van Moof bicycle company in Holland kept getting angry calls from their customers because bicycles kept arriving and they were all bent. So one of the guys there was like, oh, why don't we just, the bike is about the same size, sorry, the box is about the same size as a flat screen TV. If we put a picture of a flat screen TV on the box, delivery guy assumes it's a flat screen TV and treats it with more reverence. Beautiful idea, simple solution to a complex problem, goes on LinkedIn, everyone thinks it's great, awards are won, pats on the back all round. Now, me as a security consultant look at that through my lens, and for about 3 seconds I thought that was the most beautiful example of a simple solution to a complex problem. And then I got to thinking, hang on a minute, this Dutch bicycle delivery guy in his van turns up to the bicycle factory and loads all the flat screen TVs onto his van, and then proceeds to drive to every bicycle shop in Amsterdam and deliver the flat screen TVs. And he's got to be thinking halfway through this journey, why are all these bicycle shops selling flat screen TVs? There's no way in a million years the guy who's delivering this thinks this is a flat screen TV. So actually what I think this is as a cynic is this is a marketing exercise, and it's a beautiful one at that. So now my cyber brain goes into overdrive, and I start thinking about all the people in Holland whose TVs are turning up damaged because the guy that delivered them thought it was a bicycle. So this is what I mean by this healthy cynicism. Whenever you see a simple solution to a complex problem, think, what would Eric do? Okay, so I talked about plans. There's a great quote by Mike Tyson, everyone's got plans until they get hit in the face. So this really goes back to the test. I thought what it'd be fun to do was talk you through some of the things we are seeing out in the real world. So I'll go through them one by one. So social engineering is a really big thing. It's essentially trying to get someone to do something they wouldn't normally do. And it runs the full gamut from phishing emails you will see in your inbox, to people dropping thumb drives out where the smokers gather, to me phoning up a company and telling them, I'm such and such a person, I forgot my password, can you reset it? And just talking them in. Right through to gaining access to physical locations. So social engineering is a very common thing, and I believe that what we've done is, as we've got better and better at the technology off the shelf, as we're operating systems are more and more secure, we've made people the weakest link. So now people are very much in the frame. Obviously, there's hacking. I sit on the internet and I scan your environment and I see if I can find any vulnerabilities that I can exploit. That's still very popular. Ransomware, you've all read about in the newspapers recently. Ransomware has recently gone off the dial. Paul Kaspersky wrote a paper last year in which they declared 2016 as the year of ransomware, which was quite unfortunate given we got to February and we'd already completely eclipsed 2016 in terms of that ransomware. The next thing is malware. Not all malware is ransomware. And actually not all ransomware is ransomware. You have read about Petya and WannaCry and the smart thinking that was more politically motivated than actually a way to make money. Now, interesting thing about ransomware is because it uses online cryptocurrencies, you can track exactly how many payments are being made, where they're coming from, and you can start to see how much money these people are making. And that's one of the main theories why those big campaigns weren't financially motivated, because they didn't actually, on the scale of things, make an awful lot of money. But what we've seen is generally, as ransomware has gained more publicity and traction, we've seen less and less people are willing to pay it. And also, as we've seen more and more crime syndicates adopting a ransomware model, we've seen more shonky behavior amongst the ransomware writers. So we've seen a lot of examples of ransomware where there is actually no method to recover your data even if you pay the fine, which has really stuck a big, it's caused a big problem in the business model for that ransomware writers. Now, bearing in mind that these ransomware writers are, the companies that run these things, many of them based in Romania, they are run like financial institutions. They have offices, uniforms, staff appraisals, employee of the month, suggestion boxes, everything you have in your organizations, these organizations have. And of course, as their profits start to taper, they all sit in a room and have a brainstorming session, and they think to themselves, well, how can we grow? How can we keep growing? How can we keep that revenue growing? And I believe that what they're going to turn to, or what they already have turned to, looking at the numbers, is what's called CEO fraud. So CEO fraud is essentially social engineering a CEO or a chief financial officer of an organization to transfer money into a bank account. Now, If you can attack a company and get into their email and start to watch their email passively over a month or so, you can start to understand who talks to who makes the decisions, who transfers the money, and if you can time it perfectly, so you wait till the CEO is in China at a business meeting and then you send a message saying, hey, I need you to transfer $20,000 into this account or $200,000 into this account, right through to simply changing the bank account details on invoices. Now, the interesting thing about CEO fraud is often companies that fall foul of it don't ever get the money back. There was a supplier for Boeing who lost, I think, $128 million. The FBI have calculated $4.5 billion have been lost to CEO fraud. So this thing is growing at a huge rate. The other things is, sorry, so DDoS is the other thing that gets a lot of publicity. Denial of service, I would say, is absolutely a problem if your business is relying on real-time type things. So if you think of companies that do online betting or stock trading, if I have the capability to take a website down and I choose an online gambling website on Melbourne Cup Day and take them offline for an hour, their customers will simply go to one of their competitors and they will pay an awful lot of money in ransom. So DDoS is very much a problem for those types of organizations. And I believe we'll see more and more DDoS attacks with the explosion of Internet of Things devices. So the other thing is a little secret I'll let you into. This is my magnum opus. I'm about to drop the secret on InfoSec, which is it's actually really, really simple. There's only 3 things you need to worry about. So the easiest way to remember this is PayPal foo. So at the top, pay, people are evil, Mr. Tickle, obviously. Pal, people are lazy, Mr. Lazy. And PFU, people make mistakes, Mr. Bump. Now, what we tend to do in the world of cyber is we put all our eggs into this idea that people are evil, the Russians are coming to get us, the Chinese are coming to get us, the script kiddies are coming to get us, and they're brilliant and they're capable and they've got the intent. Whereas in fact, what always gets companies owned is their friends, the PAL and the FU at the bottom of the chart. All of these problems really stem to those guys. And it's not simply that people are lazy. You know, you're under-resourced, you're under-motivated, you're poorly trained, you're underpaid, you're misfocused, you're bored. You know, there's all of these different reasons why mistakes can happen. And I'll give you some good examples of that later on. And also, if you think about how many people bring a system into fruition, from a concept right through to design, hardware, software, implementation, delivery, even security testing, all have the potential to make those mistakes. So that's actually what I think gets people owned. And I believe we should be moving towards looking at rather than worrying about fancy appliances that stop evil people, is we should be looking, reshifting that focus to our internal people that work for us. We hear a lot of talk about insider threat, and the insider threat is people making, silly mistakes with good intentions rather than evil people working for us, although that can happen. So the next thought, I thought, well, imagine if I was evil. Imagine if I was going to come after, if I got bored of my job and I decided I want to step over onto the dark side for a bit of fun, a bit of a thought exercise, what might I do? So this is called a Crazy Radio PA dongle. It costs about $15. If you have a wireless mouse or a wireless keyboard that isn't Bluetooth, although a company has just dropped 10 0 days in Bluetooth, so that might be moot, I can intercept your keystrokes remotely. I can tweak this until it will work at around about 100 meters distance. So as you're typing in your username and your password, I can intercept that, and I can use that username and password on your corporate VPN. More interestingly, however, is I can transmit keystrokes, and I can transmit keystrokes through a mouse. So even though a mouse is designed to go up, down, left, right, click, 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 I can actually drop keystrokes, and I can write a script that will open the command prompt and write a PowerShell script using existing capabilities on your laptop from 100 meters away, or possibly even from a Raspberry Pi mounted on a drone, that will give me a terminal on your computer. It will connect back to me. Once I'm on your computer, then I can install remote access tools. I can read your emails. I can do absolutely anything. I can use your laptop as a beachhead to attack the other systems in your organization. This has been a really tough sell to organizations where we've done red teaming and pen testing, where the advisory is go and throw all your wireless devices into a skip, because they are, and think about not replacing them with Bluetooth, because that might be the next stage in this attack. So what we said to organizations is where your users are potentially exposed to members of the public in terms of distance, think about not using wireless mice in your reception desk or so on and so forth. The next thing is one of my favorites, the scenario I came up with. So what this is a USB thumb drive in an envelope with a compliment slip from a lap dancing club that I made myself using some logos from the internet that says, "Hey John, a couple of girls found this in the changing room, and based on the contents, we think it might be yours. Brandy, kiss kiss." Now, the idea being that whoever receives this is going to have it shoved into their USB socket. Now, it's quite possible to buy what look like USB thumb drives, but actually use a keyboard driver to type that sequence of commands in, pop a command prompt up, run that script, and connect back to me. I've not met a straight guy yet who has honestly, hand on heart, said, "No, I would definitely not put that into my laptop." Told you I was evil. The next thing is laziness. So, assuming everyone in the room has a smartphone, hands up if you've got a 4-digit PIN on your smartphone. So if you've got a 4-digit PIN, hands up if that 4-digit PIN has any relation to your date of birth. Got a few of you. Have you got your phone in one of those wallets that's also got your driver's license in it, or anything? Oh, you're okay then. So in a room full of people, there's usually someone who's got their driver's license with their phone, and their driver's license has got their date of birth, and their date of birth is their PIN number. Now, what's interesting about this to me is that we call these things we have in our hands phones, but they are not phones. They stopped being phones back in the days of Nokia. It's got your email, it's your two-factor auth token, it's got your private communications, your photos, everything about you. So if I wanted to, I could, it's very easy to steal a phone. You can go up to someone in a cafe and show them a postcard, and while they're looking at the postcard or a newspaper article, you take their phone from the table. About 20% of phones you can actually unlock using 4-digit PINs, using things like 000, 111, 1234, and so on and so forth. So it's very easy to guess someone's PIN. A lot of people have fingerprint sensors on their phone, but they use the PIN as the backup. So even though they've got this quite crazy biometric security, now if I'm into your phone, then I can go through your email and read your email, look at all the things you're subscribed to, your banking, and so on and so forth, and then I just go to the banking website. Hey, I forgot my password. Can you change my password? Yeah, we'll send you a link to your email, which is on your phone. I change my password. Or you've got two-factor auth. So I log into your bank. It sends me an SMS message to the phone, which I've got, and I'm in. So I'm into your internet banking. I'm into your email. I'm into absolutely everything. So stealing a phone is a very easy method. And most people, although a phone has remote wipe, find my phone, all of those things, they choose to wait till their phone gets lost in a cab before they think about setting those things up. So just a bit of an experience. So just for a bit of fun to run things off, I came up with 10 commandments of things you can do. So if we're talking about keeping an organization resilient, remember you are the weakest link in that organization. It's that people make mistakes, the people are lazy. So here are 10 quick things that you might want to think about that might help your organization be more resilient. So thou shalt not dwell in the past. So apply updates, not the first day they come out, but maybe 2 or 3 days after. Let the fanboys install the new updates and have the problems and wipe their phones. But once you don't read in the news that particular update was bad, then go and apply it. Don't reuse your passwords. I know everybody reuses their passwords. If you do reuse your passwords, and I didn't tell you not to reuse passwords, but if you do, never reuse the password you use for your email, because if that gets compromised, using, by some other website, the first thing they will do is pair the username, which is typically your email address, with that password. And then you can do this in scripts very easy. You go into that email, and then you're resetting all the passwords, and you're into everything. Using a password safe, it's very easy to use things like -1password, -lane, LastPass, which negates the need for you to keep reusing the same password. Don't use short passwords. Long passwords are better. Don't worry too much unless you're forced to by the websites to worry about fancy characters and asterisks and uppercase, lowercase. Just go long. So passphrases, the line of your favorite song, or come up with a way to remember a long password rather than a fat one. Don't rely on single-factor authentication. Most sites now allow you to do two-factor authentication. So you install an app on your phone, and you click literally on your phone. You open it and you click yes, approve with your things like your email, your internet banking, anything sensitive. Set up Find My Phone and work out how it uses before you lose your phone, please. Back up your devices before you lose your phone. I had a great thing happen to me where a friend tweeted an image that said, your phone hasn't been backed up for 90 days, you should back it up. And they tweeted the image and said, hey, I should probably get onto that, lol. And then within a week, she'd lost her phone, and the same messages on Facebook were like, hey, can anyone help me? I've lost my phone, and I don't know if I can get a backup. Please help. And it took me all the strength in my cynical mind not to copy and paste the tweet where she'd said, hey, I should get onto that. Don't click on suspicious links or attachments, obviously. It's a bit of a platitude now. If you get a phone call from a strange number and there's a big long pause before anyone says anything, just hang up. Nothing good ever happened after a big long pause on a phone call. Certainly don't agree to send money by Western Union overseas. And where you can, save the trees. Get rid of paper bills. Don't leave a really good tool for identity theft in a mailbox outside your house for a couple of days. That's how a lot of people are having big problems. The onus is on you to try and prove that you didn't order that brand new iPhone and that you're now being charged for. And that's me.
Good afternoon, my name is Tony Harb, and I'm going to talk about crisis leadership. Whilst we can talk about there's a number of ingredients for managing a crisis well. Having a good business continuity plan, being prepared. Second one is good communication and being prepared. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but also the leadership. Okay, it is one of the most important things, and it's really underdone. The other point that I want to make is that your CEO, who runs the business on a day-to-day basis, is not necessarily the best crisis leader in the organisation during a crisis. Crisis leadership is a little bit different than the normal day-to-day. Okay, who's had a crisis at work? Who's been involved in a crisis? Yep. Link Cafe, was that a crisis? Yep, bit like that, yep. So we've all experienced, and these are some characteristics of a crisis. And let me tell you, it's really uncomfortable. Being in a crisis, it's something that nobody wants to be in, and we try to avoid. So a key thing is that it's a surprise. It takes you by surprise. Henry Kissinger once said there cannot be a crisis next week. My schedule is full. Okay, and that's what it's like. A crisis is defined under the standards, not the APRA standards, but the business continuity standards, as anything that's going to take management time, resources away from day-to-day operations. Okay, so that's a definition of a crisis. There's periods of ambiguous and limited information. So one of my roles is I'm a deputy controller with the New South Wales SES. So we get a severe weather warning. We're predicting 70 mils of rain. We meet with the Bureau of Meteorology via phone conference, and we need to interpret that information. What does that mean in terms of rainfall and flooding along the Georges River? And then we get so we're sort of working on our predictions. We need to do some potential evacuation warnings for this part. Then it changes again. So that's typical in a crisis. Information does change quite frequently. There's uncertainty about the future. Link Cafe was a classic example. How long was the thing going to last? 10 minutes? 2 hours? It ended up lasting a couple of days. So the loss of proximity, how long do you plan for in that situation? You've got limited time to make a decision. You know, a crisis is not something you do over 2 days. A crisis is only the first few hours. The first few hours in a crisis is the most important thing that you need to do. So the bottom line, the crisis situation is very uncomfortable, and you know, but particularly when you're not well prepared, when you don't have a good business continuity plan. So if you are to ask me, Tony, with all your experience in the SES and business continuity experience that you do and all that sort of stuff, what are the 3 things I need to do right? And they're the 3 things, okay? Have a good plan. And if you basically comply with CPS 232, around business continuity, you have a plan, you test it, if you've done your BIA, you've done some training around people, it's a good way there. It's going to really, really help you, and you know, provided it's updated and you exercise it frequently. Good communication. In a crisis, it's actually the worst time to start preparing some templates in terms of communication, who are our stakeholders, how does it impact them, and so forth. So it's really good to have these templates pre-done, and all you do during the crisis is actually pull them back and adjustment, but you've got some really good templates there. Preparedness is the internal stuff to manage a crisis. Communication is the external stuff. You need both. And then you've got good leadership. Leadership qualities, you know, such as staying calm in a situation, recognise, understand, and accept uncertainty, an element of situation awareness, be aware of what's going on around you. So don't just sort of manage the crisis. You've got to have people out there looking at social media and looking what else is going on around there. Has the situation changed? Do I need to change my crisis plan? Be confident, be very decisive. Trust your team, really, really, really important to have a good team, and that's the reason why you exercise as a team. You don't exercise as a crisis manager alone, you exercise as a team. So everyone knows what they're doing. It's a bit of a football game. I know what my role is, and I'm going to execute it during the crisis, okay? And delegate. A crisis manager is not really doing stuff. It's just coordinating everything. So in an incident, when I'm controlling an incident, it could be a major storm event, I'm actually not doing any work. I've got someone walking around with me, taking notes, and I'm actually directing planning to do something, operations to do something. I'm on the phone call to region and so forth. So you actually don't do very much except think and execute, okay? Now, I couldn't turn up at the Institute of Actuaries Institute and actually not have a graph with an X and Y axis. So this is a graph that I picked up from Emergency Management Australia course I did a few years ago on business continuity. And basically what you have there is you have a sort of the X-axis, which is a level of uncertainty, and on the Y-axis you've got the decision stakes. And typically what we want to do in business continuity or risk management and resilience is actually push everything down in that bottom left-hand corner. We want everything to be business as usual. When we get a claim, we just deal with it. Whether it's like for $10,000 or $10 million, we deal with it. It's business as usual. If we get a policy that or a quote from a broker, we need to get cover, we do something. We don't have reinsurance, we get some facts. So at the end of the day, we want to push everything to standard operating procedure, policy systems, delegated authority, and so forth. That's our sort of comfort zone. It's a nice place to be. There's going to be some things that happen, which is a crisis event where that's not good enough, okay? And that's basically crisis management. And in that situation, we need to have good management to execute the business continuity plan, disaster recovery plan, the cyber risk plan. Whatever plan you have to deal with something that doesn't happen every day, but when it happens, we're ready for it. This stuff out there, okay, out of your comfort zone, where there's a lot of uncertainty and decision stakes are really high, that stuff, you don't have a plan, no standard operating procedure, you haven't trained, you've got nothing whatsoever. The only thing that's going to get you through that is good leadership, okay, good crisis leadership in your team. So you need to go back and think about, in your organisation, do I have good leadership in a crisis, okay? And if you don't, then you're really going to struggle. So let's have a look at an example. And Jess, you want to hit play?
Objective 1549, 700, landing 5,000.
So this is the Miracle on the Hudson. We're going to go through that bit by bit.
Objective 15.9, departure to contact, climb, maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539, hit birds through cross thrust on both engines.
Okay, so in this situation there, they've pretty much had a routine takeoff, and they're flying, and a bunch of geese fly into the engines, and they lose thrust and lose power. Where are they now in that model? Are they in basically business as usual? Are they in crisis, or are they in leadership? Who's laughing? Business as usual. Oh, not quite. Aircraft, who watches air crash investigations here? Yeah, a few of us. What's the first thing they do when something untoward happens? It's like they pull out their logbooks and they're going through checklists. And that was exactly what was happening here, going through a checklist. Now, a lot of this stuff is not black and white. It is very grey, very much like your actuarial models. You could sort of argue it's getting quite up there in terms of a crisis. But a lot of this happens all the time. When you're sitting in first class or business class drinking your wine, there are actually things that go on in the cockpit that you don't know about. Okay? So that's that situation. So let's play again and see what happens next.
Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
Cactus 15.9, new departure to contact, I maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539, hit birds through cross thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures, got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike, he lost the thrust in the engines, he's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529, which engines?
He lost.
Okay. This has all happened in like 3 minutes. Okay. So what happens now? So they've gone through their procedures and he's not getting thrust, and this is actually the lowest ever loss of power in an aeroplane in history. Okay, something like just less than 850 metres off the ground, so they weren't very high. So now where are they? Are they in business as usual, or they're in crisis, or are they in leadership? Crisis? Yeah, pretty much in crisis now, because what's happened is you don't get emergency landings every day, do you? They happen from time to time, but they're prepared. So they pretty much cleared the runway and said, right, you can park it here and just navigate and go to another airport. We'll have fire and rescue ready for you. Okay? So in this stage, at this point in time, they're pretty much into crisis and sort of almost getting to leadership. So now we'll keep playing it. Oh, it starts again.
1529, 700, climbing 5,000.
Right, this won't be, I won't stop anymore. We'll go to the end.
Cactus 15.9, new departure to contact, I maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
Don't you love the geese?
Cactus 15.9, turn left lane 270.
This is Cactus 1539, hit birds through cross thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
Tower, stop your departures, got emergency returning. It's 1529. He bird strike, he lost the thrust in the engines, he's returning immediately.
Cactus 1529, which engines?
He lost thrust in both engines, he said.
Got it.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land runway 13?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Alright, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Okay, what do you need to land? Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
Teterboro, Empire. Actually, LaGuardia departure guy, emergency inbound.
Hey, guys.
Cactus 1529 over the George Washington Bridge. Wants to go to the airport right now.
Wants to go to our airport. Check. Does he need assistance?
Yes, it was a bird strike. Can I get him in for runway 1?
Runway 1, that's good.
Cactus 1529, turn right 280. You can land runway 1 at Teterboro.
We can't do it.
Okay, which runway would you like at Teterboro?
We're going to be in the Hudson.
I'm sorry, say again, Cactus? Cactus 15.9, radar contact is lost. You also got Newark Airport up at 2 o'clock in about 7 miles. Eagle 5 4718, turn left heading 210.
210, 4718. I think he said he was going in the Hudson.
Cactus 1529, Houston.
And that's where pretty much he ended up. So a couple of things there. So in that third part there, I just really want to show you the spectrum of decision making that can go quite simply from SOP to crisis management to requiring leadership. And in that situation, I believe Captain Sullenberger showed a tremendous amount of leadership, but he backed himself. So there's a couple of things that you need to know. He's an Air Force pilot. Okay, so he's done water landings before. He knew exactly the pitch, the yaw, the speed, and that he had to land on water. They'd been trained a couple of times in that situation. He knew to land and actually next to other ships or close to the shore to effect a very quick response. So he's been there, he's done that, he backed himself, he was really confident. The other important thing in that instance was brace for impact came out from the captain. And throughout the whole aeroplane, the crew were saying brace for impact for all the people to get ready. And so you had all the people behind the captain rallying and supporting him. So it was a team thing. This thing was, they were in it together and they were going to survive together. And as a result, they all survived. So he took control of the aircraft himself at a critical point. So no more delegation. He took control of it. So there's lots of lessons in leadership from this event. I'm not going to go through that because I'm eating into the question time at the moment. But there's a number of important attributes to a good a leader in a crisis. There's some personal attributes. There's some good interpersonal skills, task orientation, and also stakeholder awareness. It's really important to focus on your stakeholders and communicate to them at different intervals as well. So having said that leadership's important in a crisis. Leadership is a decision of one person, one individual. Just a counter argument for that, the wisdom of crowds, which basically says that better decisions are made with more people. Okay, which is probably why you have an actuary reviewing actuary and no more appointed actuary, but independent review of the ICAP and APRA review of the ICAP and all that sort of stuff. And there's auditors in there somewhere as well. So just as a bit of think again. And that's all I have. Short and sweet.
Thank you to our three speakers this afternoon for reminding us that whilst we all like to think nothing will happen or it's unlikely, that's the point about risk, isn't it? It comes when you least expect it, and events do actually happen, and how we come out of them will depend largely on how we're prepared to go into them. So we are, as Tony mentioned, in afternoon tea time. So at the risk of being very unpopular, we will just open up for just a couple of questions because it just seemed too interesting to not. Any questions from the floor? We have one down the front.
Alicia from Finity. I guess this question's probably more for Eric. How do you balance especially with the increased sophistication of some of the cyber crimes and things, the balance between the security of the business versus the security of the customer? So I know, for example, if the bank rings you back when you ring the bank, they'll be like, before I say anything, can I have your full name, date of birth and address? I mean, if I was a potential criminal, that sounds like a very easy way. If you say you're Commonwealth Bank, chances are you will hit someone pretty fast if you were just calling through a phone book. So I guess, yeah, how do you balance that potential risk between accidentally giving out false information to someone that rings you with those details versus needing to get those details off people?
So your question is, when you get a call from the bank, how do you know it's the bank that's calling you, or?
Well, I guess it goes both ways. So,
yeah.
For example, if I was a hacker or a criminal getting those details off you and then ringing the bank with those details and getting your bank details, that's a risk for the bank. But also you needing to get that security off a customer. It sort of goes both ways.
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. So one is in terms of a lot of, in terms of financial institutions, a lot of cybercrime, the bank wears the cost of that. So if somebody does steal money out of my account, I phone up the bank all angry. They put the money back in the account, and then more often than not, they wear the cost of that. So that's built into their cost of doing business, and when it starts impacting them such, they start upping their processes and making it less convenient for me. There's an old adage in security that complexity is the enemy of security. I think we've moved to a phase now where convenience is the enemy of security. So in terms of the other side of the question was, when you get that phone call from the bank, how do you know it's the bank that's calling you? I often have a row with my bank when they phone me and say, hey, I'm phoning from your bank, can you just confirm your identity, give me your mother's maiden name and your date of birth? And I go, hang on, you phoned me, and we have this awkward standoff, which I take, being a security guy, take great delight in just winding them up. Often there'll be the old advice was hang up and phone them back, but let's face it, in the world of call centres, that's just ridiculous advice. Often there'll be this toing and froing where they'll tell me something that they know, for instance, how much money is in my bank or what my last transaction was, and then I have a bit more assurance. But it pays to be savvy to that type of thing. And it comes down to process, and it comes down to managing that risk. So whatever the cost of that risk of not getting that right is, then you offset with the cost of getting it right. If that makes sense.
Do we have another?
Hi there. Thanks for 3 really great presentations. My question is to Saskia. I'm Susan Louis from ANZ Wealth. And Saskia, your statement that in order to properly manage risk, we should firstly know how to measure it, and that really resonates, as I'm sure it does with a lot of actuaries in the room. However, we've had a presentation by APRA this morning where they were talking about their risk culture pilot reviews, where I think at the APRA supervisor they were saying, well, really, you can't actually measure it. In fact, what we're looking for is assessment of risk culture rather than measurement. And I was just wondering what your reaction to that would be, given that direction.
I would twofold. Firstly, culture is a very difficult thing to measure. What you can measure, however, is behaviors, and behaviors reflect culture. So there's a way around that. Now the other question there is, if you get a 10 on your score, what does that tell you? Because it effectively doesn't tell you anything. Because what you would need to assess is, what kind of a culture do you want, and what kind of a risk-aware culture do you want? If I were a loan shark, my culture would have to be reflective of being a loan shark. If I want to be a very conservative lender, my culture needs to be a risk-aware culture that is very conservative lending-based. So a 10 may be very good for the loan shark, but it may be very bad for the conservative, responsible lender. So there's much more to a subject like culture than measurement and assessment. Because even in an assessment, you would have to take into account what are the characteristics that you want for your culture, and what is good and what is bad. There's still very much an area of research there that needs to be filled in to a greater extent. One of your institutions, Macquarie, not the bank but the university, and Elizabeth Sheedy there as a professor, is actually doing an awful lot of very good work in that space. And she's continuing that work with research in superannuation next year. So I'm very much looking forward to her empirical research as to what components define culture and therefore impact behaviors within a company. And we know tone on the top is going to be one of them. We know having a structure in place that actually tells people what we think is good behavior is another one. We know that tenure and individual personal risk characteristics. I personally like to do stupid stuff in my private life. However, maybe that makes me a good risk manager, I don't know. So there's a whole range of characteristics and items that go into an assessment of what culture is and whether it's good or whether it's bad for that organization. That said, I think there are certainly ways to scale behaviors and to come to a sort of a measurement. And I think that once we've worked through the opaque stage of what we want and what we need, we will get to a scaling and a sort of a measurement in time.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to pause there. I'm hoping our speakers will be staying around over afternoon tea time, and you may be able to grab them there with your questions and conversation. Thank them all. I'm sure we've all learned a lot this afternoon. We'll go home much more cynical than we came.